Thank you, everybody, for joining the Thought Fuel podcast. And this week's episode, we have an amazing guest that is joining us. She is from my past. She's a former colleague. She is the person that I usually tap onto if I have any questions, if I need if I have like anything that I want to tackle that's complex from an organizational design standpoint or career coaching element. So I'm very, very happy that she is joining us today. So without any further ado, please welcome Tracy Toler Lightsy, a HR strategist and career development consultant. Tracy, welcome to the Thought Fuel podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And certainly, as Nicos has shared, we've definitely had a lot of experience together. And I love talking about talent strategy as well as career development and all of those components. So I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. So, Tracy, I know you really well, and I wouldn't do you justice if I shared a bio. So why don't you tell the audience who you are and why should they listen to you when it comes to career development and organizational design?
Absolutely. So my background is varied. I'll just start off with that. I have over 20 years of HR experience, but it sits in a lot of different places, different organizations, as well as different types of HR. It spans from including like recruiting background, but then also doing like what we would identify as a generalist type of background as well, which I spent a significant amount of time in. I certainly also played a heavy role in doing, as Nicos described, organizational development or talent development, where basically I was able to help parts of the business really think about how to be their best selves. And then certainly also I've played a role in being an executive coach, as well as helping leaders when they're identifying kind of like their HR strategy and really thinking about how to move their business forward from a people and culture standpoint. So as I mentioned, span a lot of different industries. I've been part of Big Fours, I've been part of hedge fund, I've been part of government organizations and consulting firms. So
Yeah. So
definitely a lot of
how
fun.
did you get into this interesting and very exciting part of business?
So it's actually pretty interesting because my background is such that I went through college with the idea of going into psychology, and at some point thought early on in my I was going to go into medicine. But at the end of the day, as I went forward into psychology, I was exposed to the concept of industrial organizational psychology. And that really centered on kind of being able to, on one hand, play as a HR type of professional, really thinking differently about the business and how do you support them from a people standpoint, but then also building in kind of how do you think of the bigger picture from an organizational standpoint. And once I got exposure to that, it got me excited because of the fact that I can see how I can apply psychology into the business field. And so after I graduated from college, I went into grad school and further just doubled down on that knowledge growth that I went through just to get kind of more experience and really understand what that means. And as a result, my first job I was able to get was in a hedge fund. Very clear opportunity very early on. I would say this is during, as we would describe, the very scary and volatile years of business. Where a lot of things were happening in the early 2000s when it comes to just the business playing field. So I got in there and I got to see it firsthand. And as a result, just having those experiences early on, that I just found that this is where I wanted to stay.
Yeah, and we're going to circle back on that because I guess, as elder millennials, as the wise people of the workforce that have been through a lot, starting out our careers from the early 2000s all the way leading up to this current year, 2024, we are no strangers to volatility, the unknown, the unexpected. We've lived through, at this point, multiple recessions. COVID, the social justice movement, the transformation of how technology changed the workplace. Some of us even remember what it's like not having a phone where you could take your work home with you, right? So we remember the before times, and definitely we're living in the after times now, right? It's completely different. And, we also lived through a time where you had to earn the ability to work from home versus now you have a generation that, for the majority of them, they started their careers from home, right? So there's a lot of wisdom I feel like we can share and that the newer generations can learn from the same way we learned from the previous generations. And as disconnected as maybe the newer generation may feel that we are to what their plight is, just because it's just such a different playing field right now. It was the same for us with Gen X and the boomers, for sure, for sure. But we're definitely going to address that. So, I guess, just kind of leaning into that, right, from, a Generation Z standpoint, what do you feel that how do you feel career development for Gen Z is going to be than it was for us 10, 15, 20 years ago?
So when I think about Gen Z, I think it's so important to think about some of the external factors that they've been exposed to so early on and how that plays a role in terms of, as you're mentioning, career development. So the external factor that stands out to me really and truly is everything that happened with COVID. I mean, in reality, between that as well as the political just landscape that's going on currently, as well as what's been happening before, it's the combination of those two that are kind of shaping what our millennials, as well as, well, us as millennials, but it's also really shaping what our Gen Z professionals or people who coming into the workforce are looking for, as well as what's going to keep them motivated and how they want to navigate their careers. And so I like to start off with thinking about from a of COVID first and foremost. As you mentioned, Nikos, a lot of individuals who came into the workforce recently have come in underneath almost a little bit of a different, just different place because they came in as remote workers. Um, they've come in with kind of a different type of way of working where they're having to navigate how do you establish relationships, build networks that aren't kind of physically and organically built, but having to be a little bit different about that, while also having not had the opportunity to really develop some of those skills from their just interactions when they were in school because of the fact that they went through COVID and we had that lockdown for a period of time during some of our really crucial fundamental growth periods. So I say all of that to think through when you come of career development and how things that they need to be thinking about and how should they be looking at it. It's really going to go right to the point of thinking through how do I establish connection and how do I establish a network that's going to help really frame out where I want to be. And then even taking another step before that, having a little bit of clarity of like when I think about me and my future self, let's say 3 or 4 years from now, maybe five, what does it actually look like? And framing out the things that matter most to you, the opportunities that you're seeing from other people that you want to be able to have for yourself, and then building on that to say from a network standpoint, who do I know that does it well? Or if I don't know who does it well, who are some people that might know others that can do it well that I can lean in? That's so going to be so crucial when you're thinking about career development and what do they need. And then I think from an employer standpoint, it's going to be super important to think through the fact that these individuals may need a little bit more support around some of those very basic, as people would say, basic ways of connection. Um, and also understand that, sometimes it's going to be necessary to think through what worked for you may not always work for them. And so having kind of those very honest conversations early, not to sound cliche, but it's true. Like being
Yeah.
able to let some of that guard down and establish, as I call, psychological safety so that people feel trust in you as a leader. And then from there, feel comfortable in understanding what motivates them and also recognizing how you can apply that.
So how do you keep up to date with your network?
Oh, wow. Well, I'll tell you, there's no silver bullet, but everything
Yeah.
you said or asked in terms of like podcasts and different things, I say yes and. Um, the biggest thing that this all kind of boils up into is intentionality. Um,
Yeah.
the key that I found, and I had this big conversation about this, I would say a couple of weeks ago, and it continues to stay a topic of conversation. But the thing that I'm constantly talking through is that although we no longer have, on a consistent basis, the ability to have these physical connection points, like these natural opportunities to stay connected, to connect with your network, um, some of the principles still apply in terms of how to make it work, regardless of if it was physical or if it's not physical. When I was working in some of my other places I've worked in previously, we would always find that there were some individuals who struggled with building or maintaining their network, even when we were in person.
Yeah.
And primarily, it was because of the fact that you have to really make the effort and you have to ensure that you found ways and establish almost norms with your different contacts, even for yourself to go like, um, our commitment. How do I want to stay connected? What is the cadence in which I'm going to build out, those touch points? What's going to matter most to those individuals when I do stay connected? And to your point, if it requires creative solutions like podcasts, so people remember you, or using social media, or even just a note to say, hey, just checking in, maybe we could do coffee from time to time. It takes all of that, but this is not unique to now. This is something that has always been the case. It's just more pronounced the fact that, yes, you have to do that. You have to be intentional to establish your network. You have to be intentional to maintain your network. And if you're not applying that intentionality, you will lose touch. So, adapting the mindset that if this is something that matters most to me, then I need to make the time to really ensure that it's taking place. And to your point, yes, there might be some awkwardness if you haven't taken the time to be intentional initially. But if these were relationships that you've already built, then it's just a matter of reaching out and saying something as simple as, hey, we haven't talked in a while. Maybe we can do coffee, or maybe we could just catch up and do a virtual connection. And that will work just the same. It's just really thinking and considering how might I be intentional in my efforts.
Exactly. And when we talk about the future, we always find a way to talk about the driving factors that paint a much more negative picture of not only the future but also of the present. But it's not all doom and gloom. We
Right.
There's a lot of great things that came out of the last 4 or 5 years, and one of them being is that we've moved the mark so much on social media and being a brand. And I remember I did so I feel like everybody that's done an MBA knows or has taken a class where they talk about you being your own brand, you need to think about yourself as being McDonald's and everything like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is at the time, maybe 10, 15 years ago, a unique way of thinking. Now everybody thinks that. So it's very, very easy for you to be intentional and unapologetic and not and
Mm-hmm.
it's doesn't look awkward when you send a newsletter out about what you've been up to for the last 6 months or for the last year,
Absolutely.
right? It's not awkward when you tell your friends, "Hey, I'm launching a podcast and I know maybe probably two or three people are going to listen to this, but I don't care," right? It's not
Right.
awkward to post daily or weekly on LinkedIn
Mm-hmm.
about different thoughts that you have about the current state of work and predictions on the economy.
Nichols, I have to say, I even remember, and now I'm going to date myself, so I'm not going to go too far back here, but but I remember where we used to have the dial-up when it came to the internet. So everything we're talking about was not even a concept that you can imagine. What you had to do was basically type up with a computer processor, um, type up a letter and send it through the mail, which feels so foreign right now. But if you wanted to stay connected to people who are in a different state and you wasn't planning on visiting them for a while, and of course, if you call on the telephone, you have long distance charges. So, at the end of the day, the cheapest way to stay connected was typing a letter and sending it to them, which, if you think about it in today's ways of technology and everything that exists, there's no way anyone could ever imagine it. It's so much easier now to stay connected using the tools that we have currently.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And there's so many different tools out there that are free, like MailChimp or
Yeah.
a lot of like Gen AI tools that can really help you stay connected to your network. This
Yeah.
year, I think as the years progress, I'm getting lesser and lesser Christmas cards, maybe because I don't send to anybody, so I don't get any. But I've gotten so many newsletters from people that I know that are saying, hey, this is what I have been up to for the last 6 months, or this is what I've been up to for the past year. And
Mhm.
I actually sat and I read through every single one of them. And I was actually happy when I was happy to get something like that, because, sometimes out of sight, out of mind, and our
Mhm.
lives are just so busy that you just
Yeah.
lose contact with people. And even people that you said, hey, I'm always going to try and stay in touch with that person just because I have some good
Mhm.
memories with them and I had a shared experience with them. Maybe that doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if I think about it, something I read recently, they were talking about how ways in which employers can keep people engaged and motivated. So, the age old question, especially as you had mentioned with Gen Zers, as well as over across the multiple generations, is what can an employer to keep people motivated, engaged, wanting to stay around? And the key that I think a lot of people lose sight on is the power of your peers. Like basically looking at your peers and knowing that you have people who you actually care what they're doing, you care about what they're talking about, your values are in alignment. Um, all of this stuff really matters. And I think that gets lost in the sauce when people are not really taking that into consideration, because if I'm with a group of my peers and my peers are saying, I'm enjoying this, or at the end of the day, they have guidance or advice on how to navigate, you're more quicker to stick around and have that relationship as well as have that experience, because you know that there's people that you can look to see how to do it well. You have people that you feel like who has your back. All of the things you described, like the value of leaning into the peers, is probably the norm that people don't take or employers don't take advantage of, but it's such an opportunity if you do it right, like
Oh,
cultivating
yeah.
those relationships.
For sure. And, we can go into details about the loneliness epidemic, right? That's happening
Yeah.
right now in the world but, as I look back at my career, the best friends that I made in adulthood, and I'm very blessed. I have
Mhm.
very good friendships that I've kept alive. I'm still in a group chat with my eighth grade classmates
So
that we
cool.
still keep in contact with, and we're 40-year-old men, right? We've stayed in contact, but the friendships that I've created along the way, I've done it through my jobs, right? In my 20s and my 30s, I created
Yeah.
amazing interpersonal relationships with my peers that I've kept alive. And even if I've changed jobs or changed roles, the people that you had a commonality outside of just the job itself, and you had more things in
Mhm.
common, I've managed to I've managed to stay in touch with those people, and some of those people are some of my best friends today. So
Mhm.
I always encourage that. And when we talk about like creating sometimes like these amazing teams, it's all about people feeling comfortable with each other and
Yes.
being themselves and connecting on a common purpose, a common goal, and sharing
Mhm.
amazing experiences, right? So when I think of something like, okay, well, we're returning to office, you really need to, as an employer, be providing employees these amazing experiences, not
Mhm.
just, happy hours or like, top
No,
golf or something like
exactly.
that, but offering them amazing working experiences where they can share common goals, share common values, and grow as people with each other. So they retain those friendships, and they see those people as an active part of their network.
Oh my gosh. I mean, the thing I think about so much when you and I used to work together, for example,
Yeah.
it needed
And just
so
so you
much.
know, just to interrupt, sorry for interrupting, right? Tracy and I are an example of that. We've stayed in touch. We haven't worked with each other, I think I would say at least more than what, 3 years, four
Oh, it's been
years?
longer than that. It's been
Yeah,
perhaps like
exactly.
7 years or something like that
Yeah.
now.
And here we are. Look at us. Look at us. So there you go. I am speaking. I live what I preach, guys. I live what I preach.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I know even for myself, when I think about kind of my experiences and the things I've enjoyed most about my different jobs, it really comes down to the people I've worked with and the relationships that I've built. It almost makes it hard for you to leave, even if there's other opportunities, because you're like, I'm worried about, I don't want to lose my friend, right? I don't want to
Yeah,
lose that connection. And so, going back to the point, the value, the power of the people that you have, that that trusted relationship that you build. I know one of my close friends, um, the way she likes to say it is, you have to have a best friend at work. Like, for her, she calls it the work husband, the work wife, whatever we want to call it. But being able to have individuals that you can trust and be vulnerable with from time to time, people you know who has your back. I mean, man, what a difference. And it makes it so hard for you to ever want to leave that environment, or you want to grow with them, so you guys want to see each other do great, which is another way to
exactly.
ensure that you're increasing productivity too. So it wins all the way around.
Oh yeah, yeah. And organizations now need to invest in.
They do.
It's an expensive thing, right? You need to invest in creating that type of environment where people can do that, and it's not just with money. It's about
Right.
setting the bar and what's important to your culture, to your
Yeah.
company as a culture, right? And
Yeah.
I think where companies now are going to struggle with return to office is they think that it's a one and done thing where, okay,
Not
come
at
in,
all.
and that's not what that's not going to help you build your culture. So I
Oh,
guess,
yeah.
from that standpoint, Tracy, if somebody's working really hard and is feeling like
Mhm.
they're not being seen, what can they
Yeah.
do to get people to notice?
Oh my, I love this question, and I'll tell you why, because it really plays to everything we were talking about around how do you create your own kind of narrative so that at least people are able to speak to that when you're not around. And the concept that you described, which I love, I'm actually going to take the whole newsletter idea, but it's really thinking about what's the impact that I'm having, right? And then how do I ensure that, as we discussed, that sponsor, that someone can speak to this and sell me up when I'm not around. And so, what people can do is really be thoughtful about when I'm doing work, keeping a journal over what are the things that I'm doing and how I'm having impact. If you don't know what your role is or even the end goal of the work that you're doing, it's important to think about, well, let me ask the question of my supervisor. When we're doing this, what are our expectations at the end of the day? Like, what's the end result that you're hoping that this will actually drive or deliver? And that way you can be able to leverage that when you're building out your own narrative to speak to, I did this, or I helped to drive or promote or, expand upon or evolve whatever it is that you help to deliver. And then really think through, as I think about where would this, how might I get this out there so more people can know? You can use all of our different vehicles of communication to be able to ensure people are aware of it. But I'd be thoughtful about, from a starting point, who are the people that I think has the most influence when it comes to kind of my growth, my trajectory, where I want to go. So who are the people that I know are in the room that can speak to it? And then with that, how might I ensure that they have line of sight on the things that I'm doing? So it could be, like, hey, just as a heads up, I'm doing this across the board. I want to share with you some of the things I've been doing. In case you're interested, you might find it valuable if you have a project or something in the future. And just sending them a note if you want to start there. You can, again, do coffee chats. You can establish a newsletter, which is a really cool, can do it, set up a cadence like once a quarter or every 6 months or so forth. But the key to all of this in terms of, you know, being sure that you're setting yourself up to have a sponsor, and setting yourself up to be viewed as more than just an executioner or a task like completer, is that you're thinking through, where does this go? Like, what's the big picture, end of the day value that the work I'm doing is bringing to the table? And then from there, how can I ensure through understanding who are the major players that are sitting in the room, who I always see with the people that I want to get to, who are those people and how might I be able to ensure that they have awareness over the way I've added value, how I've had impact? And that's how you have to frame it. Most of the biggest flaw that people do is that they speak to the task, they don't speak to the impact they've had. Um, and then separately, they use any of those relationships to complain or to talk about what's not working well versus using it to sell their skills and sell how they're showing up.
Yeah, I love that. And that plays, that's, I think you're touching upon something very, very important that a lot of people kind of lose, right? They don't get as many opportunities as they can to speak to
Mhm.
people that may influence their career, whether positively or negatively, and they use
Yeah.
that opportunity to vent,
Yes.
to vent
Like,
or um, do a Festivus where it's an airing of grievances, right? Go full
right.
Costanza on them, and it's they don't get how negatively that impacts them because
Yes.
people usually in senior positions of power want to champion people that find solutions. And
Yes.
finding a solution, you can't just list the problems, right? You can't just list the
Mhm.
problems. You really need to be creating a brand for yourself where you're the person that focuses on the solution. And
Yes.
any business right now, it's
No
never
matter
easy
what.
anywhere you go,
Right.
right? So
Mhm.
you don't want to take it, become that person, build a brand that the limited interactions where you've had with people that could change your career, you've been
Yep.
negative. That will work against you. And
Mhm.
it's not a very good approach to career development
Oh, can I
all,
jump
at
in?
all.
I want to
And
jump in really quickly on this
yeah,
point because it's so important to, the advice we're talking about right now is not unique to the business world, because that's the thing that I have friends who are in the medical industry and I have friends who are teachers, friends in all sorts of industries, and it's the exact same advice where you're like, when you're having an opportunity to talk with leadership, the last thing you want to do is use that to vent and complain. Now, that's not to say if you have something that's super important that requires some level of moving forward and they've purposed it to say, I want to hear your complaints, I want to hear where we need to be better. Sure, you can use that avenue to share. But as Nichols described, the key is also to talk through. some thoughts or ideas I have that I think could make a difference just as you're thinking through this. If you frame it in that way, that will make it show that you're not only identifying the issues, but you're identifying opportunities for how to be better, those solutions. And at the end of the day, everyone is using the term strategic as the name of the game around how they want what makes an ideal employee. And so strategic thinkers are ones who think beyond the issue. They think towards the solution that's going to take us towards our long term goals. So, and this is applicable in every world: teaching, business,
Exactly.
medicine, whatever you're in, definitely. The thing that I would say is that just to build off of that, because this is something I actually gave to my nephew who's going into engineering and really kind of creating his career in the same vein, is that you have to develop your 5 minutes like pitch. Like, I think about how you sell yourself, and when you're thinking about meeting with leaders, it should be something that's going to be very short, targeting, able to let people know in a very short amount of time um, exactly what it is that you bring to the table, who you are, what do you do, how do you add value, what are one or two big major accomplishments that you've done recently that may matter to them, and then how do I stay connected with you? Like, those are the things that are going to make a difference. And if you think about how you're speaking with leaders or anyone as a pitch, especially people who you want to be your sponsor, and you're continually staying connected to what's in it for them in this relationship. So, being able to pull out things that you've done that made a difference that they're interested in, that's going to really drive a lot more interest in wanting to see you succeed because they want to be tied to a sure thing. So, when you think about it, also consider what would be your pitch if you have the opportunity for a quick moment. And I'll tell you, in my career, I've had that happen where I met with a very senior leader early in my career. He said, I have 3 minutes for you. What can I do for you? And so, in those 3 minutes, I came up with a pitch for myself to really position what it was that I did. Really quickly, how I saw the things that I do add value that's connected to things I know that matter most to him. And then asked him, with this being said, what are other ways in which I can stay connected with you? Because I think in the future, there's some things that I can certainly play a role in for the work that you're doing. And that he was surprised that I was tight and concise with that thought process. I was surprised too, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
But it resulted in some really great opportunities that really positioned me, gave me some great visibility. So, I, hands down, best advice I've been given too. Making sure you do your homework, right? So as we're thinking about all of this, the elevator pitch, how are you going to establish connection with the sponsor? You have to know the person a bit. You have to kind of have a line of sight over what is it that they like to do. I wouldn't recommend going into meetings with someone without having some knowledge about them in some way so that you're able to kind of connect the dots for them when they're thinking about, well, why should I care about working or doing anything for you? It comes down to, well, I know this is something that's of interest to you, and this is the ways in which I can help move that forward. Like, that's huge. So,
Yeah. And yeah, and one thing that I definitely want to talk about here is, feedback. And the reason why I put it down, it's in my notes here that I wanted to talk to you about is, you know, um, feedback is such an interesting thing if it's formalized, right? It becomes sometimes a little bit mundane. And, I guess what advice would you give someone that, wants to grow in their career when in relation to feedback, how to properly request it, how to
okay.
deal with it if it's constructive and things like that?
Yeah. So I think I would start off with letting people know that feedback is a gift. And that's something
Yeah.
that I think is always hard when you're receiving it, when you're giving it. It's the fear of, if I do this, am I going to hurt someone's feelings? On the back end, if I get the feedback, is this a criticism on me to the point that it's a limiting factor? And if you think about feedback in a different way, you're like, when I give feedback, it's like I'm giving a gift because I'm investing in you. And so if I'm investing in you, the way I'm framing my feedback is not to put you down, but my feedback in giving to you is more centered on, I see potential in you, but here are things that I see could be holding you back. And so let's talk through how you might navigate that forward, move it forward. What do you think is getting in your way that's creating kind of this tension point that we're seeing? And how can I help you in, moving that forward, or addressing that feedback? So when I'm delivering it, that's really the things I like to think about is how can I frame this so that people see the gift that I'm giving as opposed to seeing it as a criticism, because it's truly me wanting to invest in you.
Yeah.
In terms of receiving feedback on the other end, again, recognizing that however people are framing it is really meant for me to think about from a growth standpoint. I'm doing okay, but there's more that I can be doing. And I'd that awareness than to be operating and assuming I'm doing everything perfect and I'm not. So always seeing get feedback as a gift, even if it's tough, it's okay. Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
the fact that someone's taking that time means that they care, and you want to take advantage of the fact that they care enough to actually give it to you.
For sure. And a big part of it is it's like exercising, right? If you do it regularly, it's harder
Yes.
for it to take it personal, right?
Yeah.
If you let it be part of a formal process, then you're kind of setting up this scenario where Adam Grant talks about this a lot, and he talks about how feedback
Hmm.
sometimes can be divided into two types, right? Like the feedback that you get from critics and the feedback that you get from cheerleaders. And
Mm.
critics attack the worst version of yourself, and
Mm.
cheerleaders praise the best version of yourself, right? But you're not really going to
Hmm.
grow out of any of that, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to have regular opportunities to collect feedback, because you can get a better point of view, not just of
Mm.
what you did yesterday that you could have done better, but what you can do tomorrow to help
Mm.
you navigate your career.
And there's nothing wrong with asking questions to get clarity and ensuring that even if the feedback is coming in a critical way that's not giving you enough information to kind of grow from it, you can think about, well, how might I be able to find out more information about the need that's going to actually allow me to be able to grow myself in the way I need to grow? Because sometimes people just aren't really good at giving feedback. I'll be honest with you. And when that happens, then that's when most people are like, I don't even understand this feedback. I don't understand, what am I supposed to do with this? And they kind of walk away from the conversation with like this misunderstanding and then frustration. But, they should feel that they also have the ability to ask questions. Like, let me make sure, you know, if I can understand an example of what does that actually look like? Like, what does good look like for you? Because if I have that awareness of what good looks like, then I'll know these are the things that maybe I could be doing differently that perhaps you were not able to provide for me in this form, this feedback forum. And I totally agree that establishing a habit of, you know, having giving feedback and receiving feedback, like making that routine is huge. And, it's something that I definitely have grown into. It wasn't something that was organic. It just, you realize the value of it.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, right, that you grew into that, what advice would you give to Tracy Toler Lightsy 20
Mm.
years ago or 15 years ago, when you were much junior in your career and you're still navigating the HR sphere?
Don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
Like, um, I mean, at the end of the day, when I was the junior version of me was more focused on if I got feedback, then that meant that I wasn't like 100% the amazing person that I thought I was. And, sometimes I would overcompensate to make up for the feedback that I gave. So, in essence, burning myself out. And you start looking and you're like, at the end of the day, yes, I needed to make adjustments, but that did not mean I had to kill myself. I needed to just get clarity on what it was that I needed to adjust. So the earlier version of me worked insane hours to kind of overcompensate for a feedback that I might have received. And then that would just be my new norm. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, this is great. She works all around the clock.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I didn't the value add. it wasn't there in the same way.
It's good. That's actually great advice. So, Tracy, we're almost done here. So I guess, I always ask all of my guests, what's a book that you enjoy that you could recommend to them? Is there like a specific book that you enjoyed reading? And it could be about, something that we discussed, or something from a personal development standpoint.
Yeah. Um, I would say a book that I really enjoyed, and it kind of played out in with some of the conversation we were having, is Atomic Habits by James
Yeah.
Clear.
Oh
Um,
yeah. That's
that book really makes a difference because it's about really starting to think deeper about what are the things that kind of going to get you to what, as we talk about manifest destination, like where we want to go, and the things that we may be doing right now that's kind of preventing us to get there, and how do we adapt better habits in order to. I just found that book so helpful, and they actually have a workbook that goes along with it. So, to help you out, if you're still needing, beyond the examples that the book provides, you need more guidance, man, that book is amazing.
it is very helpful because there's just so many good things in there, like habit stacking, and really, the examples he gives is just really really good. And he has such an interesting story of why he had to relearn a lot of things. And
Mhm.
I feel a lot of people can learn from that. And one day I'm probably going to do a deep dive on that book with
You should
with
try.
a couple of guests. So I'm definitely going to invite you to that. So stay tuned.
Yes,
So,
please.
Tracy, where can people find you if they want to hear more from you?
Sure. So certainly my LinkedIn is probably the best place if you have any questions or you want to talk to me. I look at it all the time. It's underneath my handle of Tracy Toler Lightsy. So you'll be able to see me if you just look and search that way. I think it's the best way.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for spending the better part of an hour talking about developing a better career mindset, a better growth mindset, and basically navigating your career.
Absolutely.
I think we added a lot of value to our listeners. Can't wait. And if I'm wrong, please share the feedback. We would love to hear from you. But thank you everyone for listening in to this episode of the Thought Fuel podcast. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Thank you so much.